So welcome, glad that you are here across all our locations, man. Welcome to Northway, thrilled that you are here today. We're in the second letter of these letters that are found in the early part of the book of Revelation that Jesus writes to these seven churches. Let's do something old school today. Why don't we stand up? So I'm just gonna read this letter to you from beginning to end, right over you. So of all of our locations, why don't you go ahead and stand up. And here it is, it's found in Revelation 2, Verse 8, it says, "And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, the words of the first and the last, who died and came to life. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you're rich, and the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison that you may be tested. And for 10 days you will have tribulation. Be faithful unto death. And I say, I will give you the crown of life. And he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death." So before you're seated, why don't you turn to somebody you don't know and say, "You must have done something right to be sitting next to me today." Right, go ahead, say that, and then you can go ahead and have a seat. There it is, very good, well done. Well done. Hey, I'm gonna go ahead and say this right up front. I did not want this letter. When I heard about this series, I was very excited about the series. I love this concept. I love that we're digging in to these seven letters that are found in the book of Revelation. But when they began to assign the weeks and the letters to teach, I'll be honest, I was saying like, please not Smyrna. Please not Smyrna, the suffering church. I don't like to say the word Smyrna. It just sounds like a funny place to me. Hey, where'd you grow up? Smyrna? Like, come on. Like in Pittsburgh, that would be like if you grew up in Wilmerding, right? Like you really do know there's a place in Pittsburgh, a town, a little borough called Wilmerding. You know anybody from Wilmerding? No, because nobody wants to admit they're from Wilmerding, right? If somebody comes up to you, "Where are you from?" "Pittsburgh." "Well, what part of Pittsburgh?" "Oh, like southeast." "Well, what town are you from?" "Wilmerding." "Okay, go ahead, just make fun of it now," right? Wilmerding. Who says that? So I don't like the word Smyrna. I think it's hard to say. It's just a funny word, but that's not the main reason that I didn't want this letter, because this letter focuses on suffering. And when I'm going to preach, typically what I do is I tell some people that maybe I've been talking to that have never come to Northway, I tell them, hey, I'm preaching this weekend. Like over at the gym, I'll say, "Hey, I'm preaching this weekend. You might want to come check it out." I run into a neighbor, "Hey, Tim, like, what are you doing preaching this weekend? You want to come?" But the problem is they're always going to ask, "What are you preaching on?" "Suffering." "Yeah, suffering, yeah." Might throw in a little pain and persecution, just, it's going to be a good time. Be a good week for you to come. But sure enough, the email came, and I got Wilmerding and suffering. I did. And if you're from Wilmerding, don't email me, or like, don't get offended. But you won't, though, because you're not going to admit you're from Wilmerding, right? Wonder what the school mascot of Wilmerding is, huh? What could that be? So, I've spent the last few weeks studying persecution, suffering, and Smyrna. And I'm looking forward to share it with you. You're welcome. You can say, "Go ahead. Thank you, Pastor Scott." Smyrna, it's in modern-day Turkey. It's 35 miles due north of Ephesus, where the first of these seven letters was written to. It was the birthplace of the legendary Greek poet Homer. Alexander the Great rebuilt this city during his reign. It was and still is one of the most prosperous cities in the entire region. It's located along Turkey's Aegean Sea coast. And in the early 1900s, the name was changed from Smyrna to Izmir. Here's a picture of modern-day Izmir. You can see it's a beautiful, beautiful place. Here's the key piece of history about Smyrna that comes to play in this letter that I want you to get. As many as like 11 or more major cities at this time were competing for the privilege of erecting the temple to the current Roman Emperor Tiberius. So from 14 AD to 37 AD, there was a competition among these cities. And they wanted desperately to have this temple built to the Roman emperor in their city. And the privilege was granted to Smyrna, and Smyrna alone. And this was a great honor. Because see, everyone that had lived there or entered Smyrna would have to publicly offer sacrificial offerings at that temple. And every year, the citizens in this time, they were required to say once a year, Caesar is Lord at the temple. And I'll come back to that. It's real important. Dave mentioned in the second sermon of this series, and then John mentioned again last week, that these letters all have several themes or patterns, and we've got to pay attention to these themes to fully understand or appropriately apply these letters to our lives. And David and John both mentioned the first theme, that one of the really key themes is that each letter, it's anchored in Jesus. Like, we've got to remember who's writing the letter. Jesus is writing the letters. He's speaking to these churches. And in the opening verse of this particular letter, he reminds Smyrna at the church that he's writing this. When I read that, he says, the words of the first and the last, who died and who came to life. He's reminding them, I'm the one that's writing you this letter. There's a deep connection in that first and last. It goes back to Revelation chapter 1, but it's also found in the entirety of the Bible. It's Jesus once again reminding us, he's the Alpha and the Omega. He's saying, I am God. This letter is the deep connection to suffering, and it's so important why he says that, who died and came to life. He's reminding them, I died. He's reminding them that he too suffered, but most importantly, that he and he alone defeated death. The second and third patterns that are often found in these letters is there's a commendation, there's like an accolade, there's like a way to go from Jesus that then is followed typically by a correction or a warning. And Dave reminded us, let's not gloss over the commendation, the accolade. Let's not say, okay, yeah, we're pretty good. Jesus would probably say the same thing as us as a church, or yeah, I got that part, and then sort of just get right to the correction part to find out if, oh boy, would God be correcting me on this too? No, it's important to spend some time in the commendation too, not assume that we're getting it right. So the commendation, the accolade to the church at Smyrna is that part where it says, I know, Jesus saying, I know your tribulation. I know your suffering and your poverty and the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but a synagogue of Satan. I'm going to break that down in a little bit, but just something here. Let's just start off with he's basically saying to the church of Smyrna, I've seen your suffering. Your faith in me has caused you much trouble, poverty, slandering, people vilifying you. It's an incredible accolade to the church at Smyrna. Jesus is saying, I've seen it. I get it. So here's a couple quick gut check questions. Would Jesus commend you like he does the church at Smyrna? Would he praise you for standing strong in your faith, regardless of what others say or think? Maybe a little deeper, has your faith, has it caused you some suffering, some pain, some loss of friendships, people calling you names, you being left out? He mentions poverty in there, and let's not talk about maybe our faith causing us to be poor, but has your love for Jesus ever caused you to be so generous with your resources that it actually limited some of the things that you might want to do or to buy? Have you ever done something so radically generous that it caused people to say, wow, what? I can't believe you did that. So let me take it a step further and be a little bit more blunt. Do people even know that you're a Jesus follower? You know, have you spoken up about it? Have you put yourself in a spot where you might be ridiculed for your faith or suffered? Do we talk about it? See, Jesus is telling the church at Smyrna, well done. Like, I've seen, I know what you have dealt with. So what is at the core then of their tribulation, of their suffering? I mentioned earlier, Smyrna, they vied with 11 other cities for that temple. They wanted emperor worship to be the centerpiece of their city. And receiving that honor and erecting that temple, they were going to make sure, because it was a huge win for the city, they were going to make sure that everyone worshiped it. See, and I mentioned that every year citizens were required to publicly declare Caesar is Lord at the temple, except for the Jews. In order to keep the peace, the Roman government at this time excluded the Jews from having to declare publicly Caesar is Lord. Judaism was a legally protected religion within the Roman Empire at this time. Now, the Jews still came under a lot of scrutiny, and they were often really mistreated, but they could not be arrested for that under Roman law. They had a hall pass. And the early Christians were thought to be a sect, or like a denomination almost, of Judaism, so they also enjoyed the hall pass. So what's happening here? The Jews were denouncing Christianity to the local authorities. They were casting Christians out of the synagogue. And once they were forced out from the umbrella of Judaism, they found themselves completely vulnerable to persecution and to prosecution. Do your emperor worship or face prosecution, maybe even death. You know, the phrase, a synagogue of Satan, you know, that's a harsh word from Jesus there. And he's saying the Jews were no longer being people of God. Instead, they were caught up in the work of Satan, and Christians were suffering. You know, the accolade is really clear, but the warning Jesus offers to the church at Smyrna, it's a little bit subtler. You know, like last week in the book of the letter to Ephesus, it was accolade, 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 and then Jesus says, I have this against you. It was like clear, like, oh, here it comes. This one's a little bit subtle. The warning, though, is extremely challenging. Here it comes, I read it. He says to them, do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison that you may be tested, and for 10 days you're going to have suffering, tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. Jesus is saying it's going to get worse, much worse, and you need to be faithful and endure, even to death. How many of you have what you would call like a strong tolerance to pain? You know what I mean? Like, I think it's something some people have, some people don't. You know, I do. I think I've got it a lot of times a strong I mean, I can get punched in the face and just smile at you. You know, okay. I've broken bones, I've fallen out of trees, no problem. But like every man, if I get a cold, I'm a big baby, like I am. It's just who we are as men. You know, I don't know, 17 years or so ago, I had surgery for a herniated disc in my neck. And for the 2 years prior to that, I had tolerated some of the most excruciating pain in my neck, in my shoulder. My arm was numb. And I remember for that year just trying physical therapy, trying to avoid surgery, steroids and injections in my neck. And eventually the surgery was the only option. And I remember coming out of the surgery early in the morning in the recovery room and out of the anesthesia. And man, I could tell instantly so much of my pain was gone. And then later that day, the nurse, she wanted me to urinate into this bottle. And can I just say pee? Because I don't like the word urinate either. Like, who says that? And I'm finding out there's a lot of words I don't like as I do this. But she said, I need to go do that. So, I went and I did not produce as much pee as she had liked. And she did this little test and found out that my bladder was like really, really full. And then she said these words, if you do not, she said urinate, I'll say pee, I'm gonna have to catheter you. And I'm telling you, I straight out panicked. I straight out went into full-blown panic in the hospital room. I mean, punch me in the face, slice my neck open, I don't care. But you're not doing that. Like, no way. Tina was sitting there. I said, go get me a large coffee, a couple beers, whatever it takes. I got to go to the bathroom, like now. Man, straight on panic. Nurse came back a couple hours with that bottle, and I went into the bathroom. And I said, dear Lord, Holy Wilmerding, help me. Like, please, God. And he did not answer me. He did not answer my prayer. I only peed this little tiny bit in the bottle. And I washed my hands, and I filled that bottle up 2/3 full with warm water. And I swished it around. I went out to Nurse Cratchit, and I said, I'm good to go. Like, looky here. I remember the nurse left, and I told Tina, hey, this is what I did. And she got so mad at me. She said, you can't do that. We're going to have to tell. I said, you get behind me, woman. We took an oath. Sickness and in health. Like, no way. We're not talking about this to anybody. And by the grace of God, a few hours later, my bladder decided to cooperate. And within 90%, within like 3 or 4 days, 90% of my pain was gone. But I just remember, we'll do anything sometimes to avoid suffering and pain. Anything, right? I remember thinking when that surgery was done, I had 2 years putting up with that. And it was gone, just like that. In Matthew 16, in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 16 in the Bible, Jesus, he begins to speak to this concept of pain and suffering to his disciples. And he asked them this question, who do the people say I am? And Peter, he comes back with this incredible answer. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, yes. And he goes on to tell all the potential that he sees in Peter. I just love this. He goes man, you're the rock. You're who? I'm going to build my church on you. And not even the gates of hell are going to be able to defeat it. Peter, I see so much potential in you. I'm going to give you the keys to heaven. Your words are going to be so powerful, Peter. And then in verse 21, the text just takes a little turn. And it says, from that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go through Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed. And on the third day be raised. And Peter, it says, took him aside and began to rebuke him. Peter takes Jesus aside and begins to admonish him. Far be it from you, Lord, this shall never happen to you. But he turned to Peter and he said, get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. Get behind me. Satan is so harsh, right? But he's saying to Peter, you don't get it. This pain and this suffering that I'm about to go through, it's necessary. He's saying to Peter, you're seeing this pain only in the here and now, but you're oblivious to what it's going to be like on the other side. And I think sometimes, don't we do the same thing in our suffering? I think sometimes, if we're honest, we sort of pull God aside and say, no, this can't be happening. See, why was Jesus so upset with Peter? I think because he, like no one else, he saw Peter's potential. But Peter was trapped in his human perspective while Jesus saw the eternal implications of his suffering. See, I believe God sees more potential in you than your mama does. More potential in you than your best friend or even your spouse does. God knows the things about your potential that even in your greatest moments you can't imagine. So he does not speak to our lives from the vantage point of our current perspective, but he speaks to our lives from the lens of our potential. See, others may try to hold you down based on the level of your past or on your worst moments. But God sees your potential, and pain and suffering is often, if not always, necessary to bring out the potential that God has for you. Folks, faith is not faith without suffering. Jesus said to the church of Smyrna, do not fear what you are about to suffer. And like I said, I think most of us will do virtually anything to avoid pain and suffering. But what if pain, what if suffering is needed to bring our faith to its full potential? What if having our faith tested puts us on a place on the other side of the suffering, that we're in a place where we're speaking with power and we're bringing hope and we're reaching the lost and we're changing the world? See, Jesus in the book of John, he says this to a group. He says, I have said these things to you that in me you may have peace. And then this is so important. In the world, like in the now, you will have tribulation. And that word is suffering. But take heart, I have overcome the world. Jesus never promises that there will not be suffering. In fact, look at that verse. He says there will be suffering. His promise is to walk with us, and through him we can overcome. His promises are he'll never leave us. He will never forsake us. You know, in chapter 11 of John's gospel, there's this incredible story. If you've been around the church, I'm sure you've heard it. It's often sometimes told at Easter. It's this story of the raising of Lazarus. Like Jesus brings Lazarus, this gentleman, back from the dead. And in this story, if you don't know it, Lazarus has two sisters, Mary and Martha, and Lazarus is sick, and they go send word. They send people to go get Jesus and tell him, plead with him, he's got to come because Lazarus is dying. But Jesus, if you know the story, he intentionally delays the trip a few days. And when he finally arrives, Lazarus has been dead for days. And at the home, Mary and Martha are crying, and all these friends and relatives are crying. And I don't know, like when I was crying as a boy, did anybody else's dad used to say this to them? Like if I was crying, my dad would say, look here, boy, stop that crying or I'll give you a reason to cry. Anybody's dad ever do that? I see some nods. Yeah. And then like all that did is make you cry more. I can't, I'm trying, like, but I can't, right? What did Jesus say to them in this moment? He certainly didn't say that. What's recorded is Jesus wept. He cried with them. You know, please hear me. This sermon is not intended to be some kind of like, okay, everybody, when it comes to suffering, you just got to suck it up. That is not what I'm saying. Jesus is not insensitive. He's not uncaring. He's not ignorant to our suffering. Suffering is brutal. And as a pastor, like I hear your stories and I just, man, there's days that just overwhelm me with the suffering that you're going through. His promise is he'll never leave us, that he'll cry with us, that he'll stay by your side, that he will see you through. You do know Lazarus, like, you know, he was raised from the dead that day, but you realize that at some point he did die, right? Like he didn't get a hall pass on death. And we don't know what he went through before his death. In the next chapter of John, it says that there was a plot out to kill Lazarus. So we don't know what he endured. He died. And in that moment, Lazarus, he saw God's, full glory revealed to him. See, any suffering in the present time is not worthy of comparing to the glory that will be revealed. I'll just say this. I'm so sick and tired of people saying, I can't wait to get through this pandemic so we can get back to the way it was. Too many people have wasted too much time wishing for what it was like before. God is not going to make it what it was like before. He's going to make it better. And thank God he's not listening to people wishing for the way it was, because then he couldn't make it better. And in that story, he's telling Peter to get behind him because Peter is trying to stop him from making it better. If Jesus doesn't suffer, we don't have reconciliation with the Father. Who knows what waits for us on the other side of pain and suffering? He told the church at Smyrna, and he tells us, be faithful, even to death, and you'll receive the crown of life. Please hear me. I'm saying in the midst of it, pray for healing. Pray for it. Reach out to God. But just know that his promise is to be with you. There's this term called theodicy. It's this question, or it's this dilemma. It's this, I'm sure you've heard it. How can an all-powerful God be good and allow so much suffering to happen? Right, you've heard that question. A recent survey says this: the key reason for unbelief among many, that they have a hard time believing that a good God would allow so much pain and suffering in this world. There are libraries filled with books trying to answer that question. In moments of great suffering, I've heard some really lousy, cliche answers being offered by some really well-meaning people. In times of great suffering, when they say, well, God won't give you more than you can handle. That's not in the Bible. Or surely something good will come out of this. Tell that to somebody who just lost a child. Theodicy is not a question to be solved. It's a mystery to be endured. Jesus never made a promise to keep us from pain and suffering. God did not keep suffering from happening to God. His promise to the church at Smyrna and to us is that we will not be left alone. The people in the church of Smyrna were in the midst of suffering, and more was on the way. And the warning that Jesus was giving them was they needed to decide if he was good and could be trusted. They could not wait to see how things turned out. Jesus' warning for them was that they needed to make up their minds now. See, and I really believe the same thing holds true for us today. I'm sure sometime as a younger person, you said something like, God, if you just get me out of this mess, oh man, I'll do anything. I'll start going to church. I'll do whatever, God, if you just get me out of this mess. But I don't think we stop saying that. God, if you just help my mom pull through, man, I'll really turn to you, Lord. Lord, if the test is negative, I will follow you with all of my heart. See, we need to decide if we trust God before we know the result. The question of if God is real, or if God is good, or if God can be trusted, it cannot be determined solely by the outcome of our pain and suffering. If your trust comes down to your joy or sorrow level, did God come through for me or did God not? The way when you do that of approaching God becomes a never-ending game of poker, and you're just hoping you get some good cards. If something tragic were to happen to you or a loved one tomorrow, are you in a place today to boldly say, I trust you, God, regardless of the results? Oh, I'm going to pray for a miracle, and I'm going to pray for the suffering, and I'm going to pray. But I trust you. I trust you however it turns out. See, I challenge all of us to trust God before the suffering, not based on the outcome of the suffering. Pray that the suffering unlocks some incredible, unforeseen potential in you. Like, pray for that in the midst of the suffering. God, man, this is awful. I'm going to pray that somehow this unlocks something in me, that on the other side, in a place, whether that's a year from now or several years from now, I'm going to be new. I'm going to be in an unbelievable spot. And then trust him Be faithful even to death. He promised the church at Smyrna that he will be with them. And in the end, that they will be conquerors and receive the crown of life. And we are also recipients of that same promise today. So let me pray for you, for us, across all locations. Father God, if there's someone right now in this room that is in the midst of that suffering, would you, man, Lord, just be really available to them, be really close to them. And even today, give them some kind of a little wink that you're with them, that you're weeping with them, that you're sitting with them, and that you'll see them through. And God, if there's some folks in this room, across our locations that, you know, they've suffered something great and they're on the other side of it, but they're still just really, really reeling. Lord, let them know that's okay. All of us grieve differently. All of us come out of things differently, but regardless, that you're still there. You're still present. You're still working in their lives. We love you, Lord. We lift these things up in your Son's name. Amen.